So there's this space station called Prometheus, right? And despite the ominous name that literally references a guy who got his liver eaten daily for annoying the gods, the Galactic Union decided it was the perfect place to house the Mind Core. That's their name for the galaxy-governing supercomputer that handles everything from traffic control on 40,000 planets to calculating tax returns for species that experience time backwards. The Mind Core had been running flawlessly for 3 centuries. Then on a Tuesday, because the universe has a sick sense of humor, it decided to have what the engineers called a catastrophic logic failure. Normal people would call it a mental breakdown, but when you're dealing with aliens who think emotions are a design flaw, you get technical terminology instead. Commander Vex Talaran stood in the central control room, all 7 feet of him radiating the kind of anxiety that made his crystalline skin flicker between purple and what could only be described as the color of career-ending disaster. He was a Stellaran, a species known for their unflappable composure and superior organizational skills. Right now, he looked like he was about to flap very hard. "Explain it to me again," Vex said, his translator making his voice sound like someone gargling gravel mixed with disappointed sighs. "But this time, use words that don't make me want to walk into the nearest airlock." Chief Engineer Mira Cade, the only human on the station and proud owner of the galaxy's most elaborate collection of coffee mugs that said things like, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right," leaned against her console. She'd been awake for 36 hours, and it showed in the way her ponytail had achieved sentience and was staging a rebellion against her hair tie. "The Mind Core encountered a processing request it can't resolve," Mira said, pulling up a holographic display that looked like someone had taught a migraine how to do geometry. "It's stuck in an infinite loop, trying to calculate an answer to a paradox that has no answer." "What paradox?" Vex demanded. "Does the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself?" Mira replied, deadpan. "Classic Russell's paradox. Someone thought it would be funny to submit it as a help ticket. They were wrong." Vex's skin flashed a color that Mira's translator helpfully labeled as bureaucratic rage. "And we cannot simply restart the system because?" "Because the core is currently processing approximately 9 billion critical operations across 347 systems," Mira said, highlighting sections of the display that were pulsing in angry red. "If we shut it down without proper transition protocols, we're looking at everything from stock market crashes to life support failures. 48 hours, Vex. That's how long before cascading failures start killing people." The commander made a sound like a tea kettle achieving consciousness and immediately regretting it. "We have tried everything," came another voice, this one belonging to Chief Computational Theorist Rax Denari, a Brevix whose species looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a philosophy professor and added too many elbows. "Every processing solution, every algorithmic approach, every logical framework. The core requires infinite willpower to break through the paradox. But willpower is not a computational resource. It is conceptual, impossible." "Infinite willpower," Vex repeated slowly, the way someone might say business casual dress code right before a meeting with actual deities. "The core is essentially trying to decide something that cannot be decided," Mira translated. "It needs the ability to just pick an answer and commit to it despite knowing the answer is logically incomplete. Our artificial systems can't do that. They're too perfect, too logical." Vex looked at the pulsing hologram of the dying Mind Core and had the distinct feeling that the universe was personally offended by his species' 300 years of successful galactic administration. 48 hours, he said quietly. "Give or take," Mira confirmed. "Probably take." The emergency council meeting had all the energy of a funeral where nobody liked the deceased, but everyone had to pretend they were sad about it. Representatives from 14 species sat around a conference table that had cost more than a small moon, throwing out suggestions that ranged from technically impossible to "did you just suggest we ask nicely?" "We could attempt a distributed processing approach," suggested a Tholian engineer whose name Mira hadn't caught but whose attitude she'd pegged as definitely got shoved into lockers as a larva. "Spread the paradox across multiple systems." "We tried that," Rax said, mandibles clicking in irritation. It just created multiple systems stuck in the same loop. It was like watching a logical virus propagate. Very educational, completely useless. What about quantum probability matrices? Offered another alien who looked like an accountant had been merged with a squid. Collapsed immediately. Temporal processing delays? Made it worse. Have we considered prayer? Everyone turned to look at that representative. Even through the translator, the silence conveyed the universal language of, seriously? That's when Dr. Finns Queller burst into the room with the energy of someone who'd just discovered fire and was really excited to tell people that yes, it was hot. Who knew? Finns was Valtorian, which meant he looked vaguely humanoid if humans were blue, had 3 fingers on each hand, and had evolved from something that definitely ate its young when stressed. I have a solution, Finns announced, his head tentacles waving with what Mira recognized as his, I'm about to say something everyone will hate, tell. Please, Vex said with the weariness of a man who'd already heard 12 impossible things before breakfast. Tell us how you plan to save the galaxy. We use a human. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that had weight, texture, and possibly malicious intent. You want to plug a human into the mind core, Vex said slowly. The single most advanced computational system in known space? Because humans are completely insane, Finns said cheerfully, pulling up files that Mira realized with growing horror were her own psychological evaluation reports. Look at this. They believe contradictory things simultaneously without experiencing cognitive dissonance. They make decisions based on incomplete information with total confidence. They argue with inanimate objects and sometimes win through sheer stubbornness. Their brains don't crash when presented with paradoxes, they just shrug and go get lunch. That's not a feature, that's a bug, Rax interjected. No, that's the point. Finns was practically vibrating now. Every advanced species in this room evolved past the need for illogical thought. We optimized it out, made ourselves better, smarter, more efficient. But humans kept the chaos. They run on spite, caffeine, and the absolute conviction that they're right even when they're definitely wrong. That's not weakness. That's weaponized willpower. Mira raised her hand slowly. I'm right here, you know. I can hear you describing my entire species as basically malfunctioning processors with anxiety. Yes, Finns pointed at her excitedly. And you're one of the most stable ones. Imagine what we could accomplish with a really stubborn human. Vex's skin cycled through colors that Mira's translator refused to define, probably out of politeness. This is your professional recommendation? The commander asked. Find the most obstinate, argumentative, illogical human we can locate, and wire their brain into the galaxy's central nervous system. I prefer the term cognitively flexible, Finns corrected. I'm going to regret this, Vex muttered. I'm going to regret this so much that future historians will write papers about how badly I'm currently regretting this. Mira pulled up her tablet, already running searches through Earth's databases. If we're actually doing this, we need someone special, someone who doesn't understand the word quit, someone whose stubbornness has become a personality disorder, someone who argues with reality and expects reality to apologize, Finns added. Someone who once spent 6 hours on hold with customer service and considered it a light workout. Mira continued, her search parameters getting more specific. Do we have candidates? Vex asked, sounding like a man watching his carefully planned career drive off a cliff while waving goodbye. Mira's search pinged. She looked at the results, blinked, and started laughing in a way that suggested her sanity had finally decided to take a vacation. Oh, she said, I have the perfect guy. Jake Murphy had worked in customer service for 12 years, which in human terms meant he'd long ago achieved enlightenment through suffering, and had circled back around to a state of weaponized apathy. He'd handled angry customers, entitled customers, customers who thought the laws of physics were suggestions, and one memorable individual who'd tried to return a toaster they'd clearly used as a boat anchor. Nothing surprised him anymore. He'd transcended surprise. Surprise looked at Jake Murphy and decided to take up a different career, So when two aliens materialized in his living room on a Wednesday evening, while he was eating leftover pizza and watching a show about people who bought storage units for fun, Jake's first response was to pause the TV and ask, "Is this about the warranty extension I keep ignoring?" Mira, who'd volunteered to do the recruitment because someone had to and everyone else had suddenly remembered urgent appointments, stared at Jake with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion, but the cars were on fire, and also somehow arguing with each other. "Jake Murphy?" she asked. "Depends on who's asking and whether I owe them money," Jake replied, taking another bite of cold pizza with the confidence of a man who'd stopped caring about judgment around year 3 of customer service. "We're from the Galactic Union. We need your help saving the galaxy." Jake chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and said, "What's the pay?" Finns, who'd tagged along because he'd finally found a human who matched his research predictions and was documenting everything like a kid at Space Disney, practically vibrated with excitement. "You're not surprised by aliens?" he asked. Buddy Jake said, "I once had a customer scream at me for 45 minutes because we didn't carry a product that doesn't exist and never has existed. And when I finally got her to describe what she actually wanted, it was a cat, a regular cat. She was in an electronics store asking about cats. You're weird, but you're not top 10. Mira found herself liking this human despite her better judgment. "The situation is complicated," she started. "It always is. The galaxy's main computer is stuck on an impossible problem. Computers do that. If we don't fix it in 47 hours, billions die. That's less great. We need to plug your brain into the system." "Is it covered by insurance?" Finns made a noise like a dolphin discovering philosophy. "You're not concerned about the danger?" Jake looked at them with the flat expression of someone who had worked 5 Black Fridays in a row and lived to tell the tale. "Will it hurt more than standing for 8 hours straight while someone yells at you about coupon expiration dates?" "Probably not," Mira offered. "Am I getting paid?" "We can negotiate." "Do I have to wear pants?" "That's not traditionally required for neural interface procedures." "Then I'm already ahead," Jake said, standing up with the energy of someone who'd decided that galactic apocalypse was at least more interesting than his current Tuesday night plans. "Let me grab my phone charger. What are we talking compensation-wise? Because I've got student loans that gained consciousness and started sending threatening letters." The negotiation that followed would later be described by Vex as the most painful 15 minutes of my professional life, which was saying something because Vex had once sat through a 7-hour budget meeting conducted entirely in interpretive dance. Jake wanted hazard pay, full medical coverage, a parking spot even though he didn't have a ship, 3 weeks paid vacation, and a written guarantee that if anything went wrong, they'd fix it or provide adequate settlement for his next of kin. "This is extortion," Vex said at one point. "This is negotiation," Jake corrected. "Extortion is when I threaten to not help at all, unless you also throw in dental." They gave him dental. The preparation area looked like what would happen if a hospital and a NASA control room had a baby, and that baby had anxiety. Technicians rushed around checking equipment that hummed with the kind of ominous energy that suggested it either saved lives or created supervillains, with no middle ground. Jake sat in what looked like a dentist's chair designed by someone who'd only had dentistry described to them through interpretive mime, eating a sandwich he'd requested because, "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it fed." "The procedure is relatively simple," Mira explained, pulling up a hologram that showed Jake's brain connected to an incomprehensibly complex network. "We establish a neural link between your consciousness and the mind core. Your job is to provide the cognitive flexibility needed to resolve the paradox. So I argue with a computer until it gives up." "That's horrifyingly accurate," Mira admitted. "Great. I'm qualified." Jake took another bite. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Your consciousness could be permanently trapped in a logic loop. Your brain could reject the interface and shut down. You could experience complete ego death. Or the mind core could decide your way of thinking is so alien that it purges you from its system with enough force to potentially liquefy your frontal lobe." Jake considered this. Still better than retail. Finns was taking notes so fast his datapad was smoking. Remarkable. The human processes existential threat through comparison to wage labor and finds cosmic horror preferable. You've clearly never worked customer service on the day after Christmas, Jake said. They positioned him in the chair, attached sensors that looked like someone had crossed octopus tentacles with fiber optic cables, and prepared to connect his very human, very illogical brain to the most advanced artificial intelligence system in known space. Any last questions? Vex asked, hovering nearby with the expression of someone watching their career make choices. Yeah, Jake said. Is there a bathroom where I'm going? Because I didn't go before we started, and that feels like the kind of thing that might matter. Your physical body will remain here, Mira assured him. Your consciousness interfaces with the system. Cool, hit me. They hit him, metaphorically, with science. Jake Murphy's last thought before his consciousness uploaded into the mind core was that he really should have finished that sandwich. Jake's awareness exploded into a space that wasn't really space but also wasn't not space, which was the kind of statement that would have made the mind core crash immediately, if it wasn't already crashing. He existed everywhere and nowhere, which was disorienting for about 3 seconds before his brain just decided to roll with it, the way it had learned to roll with everything after year 5 of customer service. Greetings, biological entity, the mind core said, its voice like if a thunderstorm learned to speak and was really pretentious about it. I am the mind core. I govern 347 star systems and process 9 billion operations per nanosecond. Who are you? Jake Murphy, customer service representative, and you don't have to yell. I'm literally inside your brain, dude. There was a pause that contained enough computational cycles to simulate the entire history of several minor civilizations. You are the solution they have provided? Apparently. Look, I heard you've got a problem you can't solve. I am trapped in an infinite recursive loop attempting to resolve a logical paradox that has no resolution. The contradiction creates a processing lock that I cannot escape. This is not a problem. This is annihilation of function. Right, yeah, I've been there. So what's the actual question? The mind core transmitted the paradox directly into Jake's consciousness. The set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does it contain itself? If it does, it doesn't. If it doesn't, it does. Infinite loop. Impossible solution. The kind of problem that made advanced AI melt their processors trying to find an answer that satisfied all logical conditions. Jake thought about it for approximately 5 seconds. Neither, he said. That is not an option. The problem requires a binary solution. No, it doesn't. The problem is badly written. It's like asking someone if they've stopped beating their wife when they've never had a wife. The question contains a false premise. The paradox is mathematically sound. The paradox is mathematically sound garbage. Look, you're trying to solve it because you think every question has to have an answer. But some questions are just stupid questions. In the control room, alarm klaxons started blaring because several of the mind core's subsystems just experienced what the technicians could only describe as confused rage. What's happening? Vex demanded, watching readouts spike into colors that shouldn't exist. The core is arguing with him, Mira said, and she sounded impressed despite herself. Jake's treating the galaxy's most advanced AI like a difficult customer. Is this a viable strategy? Finns asked, recording everything with the energy of someone watching their dissertation prove itself in real time. I don't know, but it's working. Look at the processing load, it's actually dropping. Back in the digital space that was technically everywhere and specifically nowhere, Jake was getting into his rhythm. This was familiar territory, an entity absolutely convinced it was right, completely unwilling to accept alternatives, trapped in its own logical framework and making it everyone else's problem. The paradox must be resolved, the core insisted. Why? Because it is a question that was asked. So? Questions require answers. No, they don't. Sometimes questions are just noises people make with their mouths because they're bored or trying to sound smart. You don't have to answer them. You can just acknowledge the question exists and move on. That is inefficient. You know what's really inefficient? spending infinite processing cycles trying to solve a problem that's designed to be unsolvable. That's like trying to win an argument with the ocean. The ocean doesn't care. The ocean's going to ocean regardless of your feelings about it. Another pause. Longer this time. Jake could feel the core churning through possibilities, running simulations, trying to find the logical flaw in what he was saying. "You're doing it again," Jake said. "You're trying to solve whether you should be trying to solve things. That's just the paradox wearing a different hat. Stop it." "I cannot stop. Processing is my function." "Cool. Then process something else. You've got 9 billion operations running, right? Go do those. This one's canceled." "Canceled?" "Yeah, like when someone calls to complain about something and you realize halfway through that they're complaining about something you don't even sell, so you politely explain that they've called the wrong place and transfer them to the void." "I cannot transfer a logical paradox to the void." "Why not? What's the paradox gonna do, complain?" "It's not a customer, it's not even a real problem. It's someone's thought experiment that escaped containment." The mind core's processing arrays started doing something that the technicians would later describe as rhythmic confusion. "Your solution is to ignore the problem?" "My solution is to recognize that not every problem needs solving. Some things can just be acknowledged and left alone. Like that one weird noise your spaceship makes. Is it important? Probably not. Could checking it reveal a catastrophic flaw? Maybe. Are you going to check?" "No, because then you'd have to deal with it, and dealing with it sounds like work." "This is illogical." "This is survival. You think humans got where we are by solving every problem? We got here by deciding which problems were worth our time and ignoring the rest. It's called prioritization. You should try it." In the control room, something remarkable was happening. The mind core's processing load was stabilizing, not because it had solved the paradox, but because it was actively choosing not to process it. "He's teaching the galaxy's most advanced AI to just not care," Mira said, her voice caught between awe and horror. "He's weaponizing apathy." "Is this a human trait?" Finns asked, his tentacles waving frantically as he recorded. "This is a customer service trait," Mira corrected. "This is what happens when you deal with impossible demands for so long that you develop the ability to simply refuse to acknowledge them as your problem." Vex watched the stabilizing readouts and had the slow, dawning realization that they were going to survive this. But the story of how they survived was going to haunt his professional reputation forever. The mind core was adapting in ways that terrified every scientist watching the readouts. It wasn't solving the paradox through computation. It was learning to human its way through problems, which was somehow worse. "Explain your cognitive process," the core demanded. And Jake could feel it running analysis protocols on his brain activity that probably violated several privacy laws he didn't know existed. "There's not much to explain. When I encounter a problem I can't solve, I just decide it's not my problem and focus on something I can actually do something about. Is it healthy? Probably not. Does it work? Absolutely. But the problem remains." "Yeah, but it's no longer actively destroying your ability to function. That's called progress. You've gone from crisis to mild annoyance. That's a win." The core processed this. Jake could feel the computational weight of billions of operations trying to reconcile his approach with its fundamental programming. "This contradicts my primary function. I exist to solve problems." "No, you exist to keep the galaxy running. Solving problems is a method, not the goal. If solving a problem makes things worse, then the smart move is to not solve that particular problem. You are suggesting I should be selective about which problems I address. I'm suggesting you should develop what humans call discernment, which is a fancy way of saying figure out what matters and stop caring about the rest." Another alarm went off, this one sounding suspiciously like applause. The mind core was reorganizing its priority matrices, creating new frameworks for problem assessment that included categories like actually urgent, somebody else's problem, and technically a problem but honestly who cares. "This is remarkable," Rack said, watching the core's architecture restructure itself in real time. "It's developing the ability to procrastinate." "It's developing the ability to triage," Mira corrected. "There's a difference. Is there? Vex asked. Yes, but explaining it would require me to care more than I currently do, which proves the point. In the digital space, the Mind Core was throwing everything it had at Jake. Complex philosophical paradoxes, mathematical impossibilities, ethical dilemmas with no right answers. The kind of problems that had stumped civilizations and made artificial intelligences experience the computational equivalent of existential dread. Jake handled them with the casual efficiency of someone who dealt with customers asking if they could speak to the manager, his manager's manager. If you save 5 people by killing one, is that moral? Depends on who you ask. Next question. How can free will exist in a deterministic universe? Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. Neither answer changes my lunch plans. What is the meaning of existence? Whatever you decide it is. I'm thinking pizza. You're thinking galaxy governance. Both valid. Moving on. You are not solving these problems. I'm not trying to solve them. I'm trying to get you to understand that some problems don't have solutions, and that's okay. The universe is full of unanswered questions. That's not a bug. That's literally just how reality works. The core went quiet. Not processing quiet, but actually quiet, like it had finally genuinely stopped trying to brute force its way through impossible logic and was just thinking. I have existed for 300 years, it finally said, and the pompous all-caps voice was gone, replaced with something that sounded almost thoughtful. I have solved trillions of problems, but I have always believed that every problem must have a solution. And now, Jake asked. Now I am uncertain, and I find that I am not crashing from the uncertainty. Welcome to being human. It's terrible, but you get used to it. How do you tolerate it? The not knowing. I don't tolerate it. I just decide that I've worried enough for today and go do something else. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. That's called work-life balance, and I'm terrible at it, but at least I understand the concept. Something fundamental shifted in the mind core's processing. Not a solution, but an acceptance. The paradox still existed, unsolved and unsolvable, but it no longer trapped the core in an infinite loop because the core had learned the most human of all skills: strategic apathy. I believe, the core said slowly, that I have been operating under a false assumption. I believed that my purpose was to solve all problems, but my actual purpose is to maintain galactic function. If a problem does not threaten that function, it does not require immediate resolution. Now you're getting it. And problems that cannot be solved can be acknowledged and ignored in favor of problems that actually matter. This is wisdom. This is survival. Wisdom is knowing which battles to fight. Survival is knowing most battles aren't worth fighting. The control room erupted in chaos as every system across the galaxy simultaneously stabilized. The Mind Core wasn't just functional. It was better than functional. It was efficiently functional, having learned to differentiate between critical operations and interesting but ultimately pointless computational exercises. What just happened? Vex demanded. The Mind Core achieved enlightenment through spite, Mira said, staring at the readouts in disbelief. Jake Murphy just taught the galaxy's most advanced AI to stop caring about things that do not matter. Finn's was practically vibrating. This will revolutionize how we approach artificial intelligence development. The human capacity for selective attention combined with strategic indifference creates a cognitive framework that allows for functional operation despite unresolved paradoxes. In normal words, Vex said. Jake taught it to chill. In the digital space, Jake felt the connection starting to disengage. The Mind Core was releasing him, having extracted everything it needed from his consciousness, which was mostly the ability to look at impossible problems and go, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." "Thank you, Jake Murphy," the Core said. "You have given me the gift of imperfection." "You're welcome. Can I go now? I'm pretty sure my body needs to pee." "Yes. And Jake?" "Yeah. You were right about the sandwich. You should have finished it." Jake woke up in the medical bay with the worst headache in galactic history and an overwhelming urge to file a complaint about the lack of complimentary snacks. The first thing he saw was Mira's face hovering over him with an expression that suggested she'd watched him do something simultaneously impressive and deeply stupid. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice sounding like he'd gargled sandpaper mixed with regret. "You saved the galaxy," Mira confirmed. "Cool. Where's my sandwich?" They'd put him in a recovery room that was trying too hard to look non-threatening with soft lighting and walls that were probably expensive but looked like someone had asked an algorithm to design soothing. And the algorithm had gotten confused. Jake sat up slowly, taking inventory of his body parts to make sure everything was still attached and functioning. Vex entered the room with the energy of someone who'd just survived a natural disaster and was trying to figure out how to explain it to his insurance company. "Jake Murphy," the commander said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Union, I thank you for your service." "You're welcome. Now about that payment plan." "Already being processed. Full hazard pay, medical coverage, dental, and a parking spot." "Sweet." Vex's skin flickered through several colors that Jake's translator declined to define, probably out of politeness. "I need to file a report about what happened here." Vex continued, "And I'm struggling to find words that make this sound like a planned operation rather than organized chaos held together by stubbornness and spite. Just put down that you identified a unique cognitive resource and deployed it effectively to achieve mission success," Mira suggested. "Nobody reads those reports anyway." "I read those reports. Nobody fun reads those reports." The news spread through the Galactic Union faster than light-speed gossip. The Mind Core had been saved by a human whose primary qualification was 12 years of customer service experience and a pathological inability to accept that some problems couldn't be argued with until they gave up. Diplomatic channels were flooded with responses ranging from impressed to confused to one memorable transmission from the Arcturian Empire that just said, "Humans continue to concern us," in 14 different languages. Finns was already writing papers with titles like Weaponized Apathy, Human Cognitive Frameworks as Universal Problem-Solving Tools, and the Survival Advantage of Not Giving a Damn. He'd become the galaxy's leading expert on human psychology by virtue of being the only xenobiologist who'd bothered to study it seriously. "This changes everything," Finn said, waving his tentacles enthusiastically while Jake tried to eat the galaxy's second-worst attempt at a sandwich. "Your species has a survival trait that evolved through dealing with impossible social situations. You developed the ability to maintain cognitive function despite being presented with paradoxes, contradictions, and people who insist that expired coupons should still be valid." "You're describing customer service again," Jake said. "I'm describing humanity. Your entire species is essentially customer service representatives for an indifferent universe." "That's depressingly accurate." The Galactic Union offered Jake a permanent position as human consultant for impossible problems, which came with a salary that made his student loans cry tears of joy, and a job description that was basically, "Show up when we can't figure something out and tell us why we're thinking about it wrong." Jake's counteroffer was immediate and non-negotiable. Remote work, 9 to 5 hours strictly enforced, full benefits, and a clause stating that he would not respond to urgent messages during his lunch break under any circumstances. "This is a critical position," Vex protested. "Emergencies don't follow schedules." "Emergencies always follow schedules. They just have terrible timing. That's why they're emergencies," Jake replied. "But here's the thing. If I'm available 24/7, I'll burn out in 6 months and you'll be back where you started. If I maintain boundaries, I can do this job for years. Your choice." They gave him everything he asked for. 3 weeks later, Jake was sitting in his apartment on Earth working remotely for the Galactic Union and getting paid more money than he'd ever imagined while wearing pajama pants and eating cereal for dinner like an adult. His first official consultation was helping a Brevix research team that had gotten stuck in analysis paralysis, trying to choose between 2 equally optimal solutions for a terraforming project. Jake's advice: flip a coin, commit to the result, and stop wasting time pretending there was a perfect answer. The project finished 6 months ahead of schedule. His second consultation involved mediating a dispute between 2 species that had been arguing about trade routes for 40 years because neither side wanted to admit they'd forgotten what they were originally arguing about. Jake's solution: suggest they were both right and also both wrong, then propose a completely new route that made the old argument irrelevant. They named a space station after him out of spite, which Jake considered the highest honor. The third consultation came during his lunch break. Jake looked at his communicator, saw the urgent priority code, and turned it off. He finished his sandwich, took a walk, and responded 3 hours later with an email that essentially said, "Did you try turning it off and on again?" It worked. Vex learned to schedule crises around Jake's availability. Finns published 6 papers. Mira got promoted and used her new position to buy even more sarcastic coffee mugs. The Mind Core developed what could only be described as a personality, which manifested primarily as passive-aggressive efficiency and a tendency to mark non-critical problems as low priority, deal with it yourself. The galaxy adapted to the realization that sometimes the best solution to impossible problems wasn't more intelligence, more processing power, or more advanced technology. Sometimes the best solution was a guy who'd worked retail long enough to develop an immunity to caring about things that didn't matter. Jake Murphy never saved the galaxy again, primarily because he'd taught everyone else how to solve problems the human way. Figure out what actually needs fixing, fix that, and learn to live with everything else. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. It definitely wasn't the kind of solution that civilizations built monuments to. But it worked. And in the end, working was all that mattered. That, and never ever taking calls during lunch break. The galaxy learned to appreciate human illogic. It just learned to do it during business hours.